Welcome, folks. My name is Ann Harvey. I'm the chair of the Sound Defense Alliance Board. I live in Coopville, Washington, under the Growler jets, and I'm really concerned about the impact of jet noise on all of the human and animal residents in our region, especially children. After I introduce Dr. Arline Bronzaft and introduce the Sound Defense Alliance, we're going to move into our interview, and we will have time for questions and answers during our hour together. I want to thank Tara Huey, who is our technology guru, moderator today, and the social media coordinator for Sound Defense Alliance. So thank you, Tara. Thank you, Dr. Bronzaft, for joining us today. It is a tremendous privilege to introduce you and your research and your advocacy on noise to people of the Pacific Northwest, especially those of us who are living with the impacts of growler jet noise on our communities, on the wildlife, and on our pets too, on the Salish Sea and the endangered orcas. You've been a leader in this field for decades, and we especially want to honor you and your work this month, March, Women's History Month. So many of you may know of Arlene's work. I want to make sure that we get this opportunity to hear her story directly from her. It's especially fitting for our focus on Women's History Month. She can claim many firsts. She's encountered plenty of obstacles, and she has forged ahead. I think persistence should be her middle name. She was one of the first women to complete her PhD in environmental psychology at Columbia University in the 60s. Her seminal research on the impact of subway noise on children's learning led the way to research in this area. She's been in the forefront of this effort ever since, with her research and advocacy as the co-author of Noise Matters and many more publications and advocacy efforts that you'll hear more about when she speaks with us. She's currently Professor Emerita at City University of New York, and honorary chair of Quiet Skies, which is a project of quiet communities. And there's so many more things to say about what Dr. Bronzaft is doing now. Grow New York is another piece that we may touch on, because I'm so interested in that connection to noise too. We hope that this interview can contribute to the inspiration of girls and women of all ages to pursue their dreams and their potential as future researchers and advocates for positive social and environmental change. So a word about the Sound Defense Alliance. The mission of our organization is to work to protect our communities and the natural environment from the harmful military activity around the Salish Sea, Puget Sound, and the Olympic Peninsula. We're a coalition of groups around our region that include the Olympic Peninsula, the San Juan Islands, Whidbey Island, and Camano Island. There are certainly people from outside of this area that are a part of our movement as well. The impacts, as we know, include deafening noise, physical and mental health impacts on the well-being of us, people and creatures who live with this noise, poisoned air, land and water, as well as economic and housing impacts, and harm to, as I mentioned earlier, marine, air, and land species, some of which are threatened or endangered, like the orca. We're in this fight for the long haul. We are sticking it out. We are going to persevere. Our foci are threefold. First, we're building political power by expanding our base and our visibility in our membership. Second, we are promoting legislative action by deepening our relationships with elected officials and being included at the table. And third, we're building our organizational capacity. So I want to encourage everyone who's joined us today to become a member of the Sound Defense Alliance if you are not already a member, by going to our website, and you can check the chat box for our website address. Be sure to like us and share on Facebook and get involved. So, Dr. Bronzaft, what experiences shaped you as a girl and a young woman that led to your decision to pursue a doctorate in environmental psychology? Tell us about your early years.
All right. I was fortunate to have a father that said I was the smartest kid on the block. And I think, considering my age and the time at which he told me this, I needed that encouragement. And I think that was key. The second thing, as you know, I met my husband when I was 16. So to meet a young, intelligent man who appreciated a woman who was going to go on to a higher degree, I think was super. So my attitude towards men has to be a very positive one with my father and my husband. And then I did pursue my career. I was fortunate enough to go to Hunter College, City University of New York. And my 4 years.
How old were you?
I finished Hunter when I was 19. Hunter was free. Well, not exactly free. My entire education, including books, cost less than $100. I was very fortunate. I was fortunate to be accepted to Columbia University for my graduate degree. And I was even more fortunate when Hunter made me a teaching assistant at 19. So I was already in the class teaching. And by 21, I was a full-time member of the faculty. I think I was very fortunate. I got good breaks. No one stopped and said she's a woman. And it was my academic ability, I think, that allowed me to move forward. But in terms of being an activist, I can tell you that as a child, I was an activist, because when I learned that after the Second World War, there were children that were starving in Europe and needed food, I started a food drive and took a baby carriage and collected cans to help people who needed food. But what really pushed me, I think, into activism was I was part of the anti-war movement. And that was the late 60s and early 70s. And I think if you became an activist then, you may have stayed an activist, and that's what I did. So I have to say I was encouraged by a wonderful father, a mother who also helped me, and that she took care of my children while I was teaching and doing my activism work. A husband who, from the day I met him, was so supportive. And then, of course, my children were cooperative because they had a mother who was working, a mother who's doing research, but more importantly, a mother to these children. So in a nutshell, I do feel that I was fortunate. Let me add one thing about Women's History Month. I helped found the Women's Studies Department at Lehman College. I was also the former chair of the Women's Studies Department at Lehman. And while I was a professor there, we had conferences and talks to celebrate Women's History Month. So I think this was such an appropriate time for you to ask me to talk. Thank you. I said too much.
No, that was wonderful. And some more questions come out of what you were just describing. And thank you for adding that component of your involvement with creating the Women's Studies Department. So why environmental psychology? What led you into that?
Actually, my degree from Columbia was not in environmental psychology. The degree was pure academic graduate school degree. It started in a classroom at Lehman College. I did become interested in the impacts of the environment on human behavior. That was on my own. But I had a student in my class that said, Dr. Bronzaft, after I talked about noise, I have a child that goes to a school next to an elevated train track. And the noise from the trains is so disruptive that my child, as well as the other children, cannot learn in that classroom. And the teacher probably cannot teach. We are going to sue the city of New York so that our children can learn in a quieter environment. My husband was an attorney. And so the wife of an attorney said, in order to sue, you have to prove that your children are being impacted by the noise. She said, can you help us? And I said, okay. So I went to the principal of the school, asked to look at the reading scores of the children exposed to the train noise, had the children, that was one group of children, and then there were children on the quiet side of the building. Perfect experiment. Two groups of children, all the other variables held constant, same neighborhood, same school, one exposed to the noise and one not. And when I looked at the reading scores, by the 6th grade, the children were nearly a year behind in reading when their classes were exposed to the tracks. I also spoke to the teachers. They found it very difficult to teach and were exhausted when they came home after a day at a school where classrooms were exposed to noise. So as an academic, I published the paper in a peer-reviewed journal, but the mother did not ask me to do a study. The mother asked me to help her child. And so I felt obligated to go beyond. And so I did go to the Transit Authority, discovered they had a method to quiet the noise that they were going to test out, and helped to persuade them to check out this new method next to the school. And then went to the Board of Education and got them to put acoustical ceilings in the classrooms. So people say to me, how did you get two agencies like this in the city of New York? Well, let me tell you who supported me. Parents, community, public officials, the media. I had tremendous support. And the two abatements were put into place. And of course, I was asked by a public official, go back and see if it made a difference. Now, my daughter, when I started this study, was 8 years old. She could not understand why her mother had to study something so obvious. She said, Mommy, how can children learn in a noisy classroom? I said, I know, darling, but we have to prove it. We have to look at their reading scores. And so when I went back, I think you would have said, well, it should have been better, but I had to prove it. Remember, that's what I told my child. And it turned out after the abatement, children on both sides of the building were reading at the same level. I have to compliment New York City for being so cooperative. I then went to the Transit Authority to talk to them further. They said they would do similar treatment near all schools exposed to the tracks. But I said people also live near the tracks. And so they said they would use that technique to abate the noise throughout the entire system. And so that was the start. I think from that study, from the fact that we were able to change policy in the city of New York in the sense that we recognized that noise had to be abated. And that started my whole life in the world of noise. So I've done other research. Let me add, I've written a book on child rearing. I've done studies on women's aspirations. All of that sort of had to be put aside, and noise took over my life. And then from then on, I became an advocate, and the mayors of the city of New York appointed me to Grow NYC. You know, we run green markets in the city, farmers markets. We do recycling, and we also have a noise section. So the mayor appointed me to the board of Grow NYC, but so did 4 other mayors after that mayor. So I've served as an advisor on noise, and anyone that can go to Grow NYC that has a noise problem in New York City can call me personally for my assistance.
Wow.
So it keeps me busy.
Really? I wanted to learn more about Grow NYC, and I'm like, what's the connection here? And I saw the education foci, and one of them being noise. And it's like, there you go. It's right there connected to this organization. I was sure it was in there somewhere that noise piece was there. And it's also really exciting to learn more about what Grow NYC is doing. So tell us a little more about what it was like to be one of the few women in your program, to be an only woman. You described one of, I'm sure, many photos behind you.
Yes.
What was that like? What's that?
Well, let me tell you, I served on the transportation committee. I also helped in redesigning the New York City subway map and did testing on the map to see how effective it was. And yes, all the other people on the committee were men. And most of the people I've met in the world of transportation were men. I've also worked with the Department of Environmental Protection, but there are some women. And I felt it was my skills that people were much more interested in. After all, 5 mayors have appointed me to the board of Grow NYC, a non-paid position. So I've served for men like David Dinkins, Rudolph Giuliani, the present Mayor de Blasio, Bloomberg. None of them questioned anything about my political views. It was essentially my work. Mm-hmm. And that I feel very fortunate about. So I have found that most of the time, I'm not saying all the time, by the way, at the university, for me to get promoted to a higher level, I did have to charge them with sex discrimination because I was being held back. Mm-hmm. But fortunately, I married an attorney. And so when my attorney came to my defense, rest assured, we were able to get a promotion for me, and the sex discrimination was put aside. But I do know what sex discrimination in the academic world is like. But for the most part, I would say that since I'm advocating the lessening of noise, and by the way, let's not forget, noise is a health hazard. The studies are overwhelming that people who are subjected to aircraft noise, studies in the United States and abroad, have found increased risk for cardiovascular disorders. That's serious. Noise is a stressor, and we all know that stress can lead to physical disorders. Mentally, noise is a stressor. People cannot live with noise. The thing that happens when people call me in New York City with a noise problem, fortunately, I'm a psychologist, because the first 5 minutes, I'm listening to a person in such anguish who is so disturbed. And though I have not yet helped that person, the fact I've listened and the person knows that someone understands. And the other thing about noise, when you mention that you're bothered by noise and people dismiss you, you feel helpless. There's something in psychology called learned helplessness, where you think nothing will ever change and you begin to give up. This is added stress to the body. So here I am listening, and just by listening, and sometimes I do resolve the problems, the people finally find someone who knows what they're suffering, and they're most appreciative of that.
Thank you. I think you take us right into where I want to go around what we have learned and what do we still need to learn about the impacts of noise on mental health and physical health. And I think your focus on stress and noise as a stressor is so important. It's a really powerful reminder, and the impact that has on cardiovascular disease. Can you tell us more about what we've been learning, and one of the things you and I have talked about as well before is, we've got lots of research, and yet we know our elected officials want the data now. They want current data. And I know that there's been a lot of work in Europe in particular on the noise issue. It sounds like more than in the US. Can you tell us more about what we're learning, what we have learned, again, about mental and physical health impacts on people, children in particular, and what do we still need to learn? What research is not being done that we need to conduct?
Okay, I'm going to say, look, I'm an academic, I'm a researcher, and I'm going to tell you, I don't think we need more research. So let me get to the early start on this. In 1972, the United States passed the Noise Control Act. We also had the Clean Air Act. The president at the time, do you want to tell me who the president was at that time when everything like this was happening?
You go for it.
Richard Nixon. He also set up the Environmental Protection Agency. But more importantly, he appointed good people to that agency. We had William Ruckelshaus. We had Russell Train. When EPA was set up, they had something called the Office of Noise Abatement and Control. They produced literature on the impacts of noise on health and well-being. And one of their pieces of literature, they cited my study. I have this literature in my household, so anyone wants to come to New York City, they can come to the noise room and see how advanced the United States was in the 70s, recognizing the adverse effect of aircraft noise. Russell Train is quoted in one of the talks he gave in the late 70s, in which he said, "We know enough to do something about it. Let's get something done." In the brochures that I have on noise, produced by the Environmental Protection Agency, it said, yes, we may have to do some more research to link noise to specific health hazards. However, we know enough to know to do something now, and not to do it is to allow people to suffer unnecessarily. Dr. Bronzaft is not saying that, the Environmental Protection Agency. Unfortunately, in 1980, when Reagan became president, things changed and we cut back on our noise efforts. And unfortunately, with all the presidents that followed, both Democratic and Republican, we did nothing. And Europe, yes, took the lead. But in this country, in the 70s, we were at the forefront. And I think to have said at that time, yes, we could do some research, but we have enough to act. The key thing is action. Remember, the Transit Authority did not say, as it should have, Dr. Bronzaft, do another study. There's no other literature supporting you. It didn't. It took action. Give them a plus for that. So while I do appreciate the latest studies because they definitely linked noise to cardiovascular disorders, yes, other studies after mine definitely demonstrate that noise affects children's learning. There's also research that says children's cognition and language development are impeded in households with noise. So I'm not going to say no to research because I am a researcher, but enough is enough. So I would urge you to read the paper that's on the Grow NYC website, the publication that speaks to the divide between noise and policy. How much knowledge must you acquire to act? Aircraft noise is harmful to health. And by the way, let's look at the definitions of noise. True, I used to define it as unwanted sound that's also uncontrollable, as opposed to sound, which is a physiological phenomenon which rests on hearing. And noise, though, is more than just unwanted sound. Noise now can be defined as a harmful hazard to health. We should not forget that loud sounds deafen people. We haven't talked about hearing loss. That, I think, is has been accepted. Sound that is that intrusive that people become stressed out and can't sleep is affecting health. So my definition of noise now, it's a health hazard, and we must act now to lower the decibel level.
Thank you. Yes. Thank you. And that takes me right into thinking about your work with Quiet Skies and then the project of quiet communities. And I talked a little bit about the group of legislators, of our senators and representatives who have, I take it, fairly recently formed a group that's really focused on this issue. Can you tell us more about
the Quiet Skies, Congressional Quiet Skies Coalition?
Quiet Skies.
I'm very impressed. Quite a number of people are from New York City. I know Grace Meng was very instrumental, and I have spoken at a meeting that Grace Meng held when she was in the New York Assembly and talked about noise. So we have New Yorkers on there, but we also have California. We have Eleanor Norton Holmes. So it's a group of congressional people that are focused primarily on aircraft noise and trying to get the FAA to acknowledge that noise is a health hazard. The FAA thinks it's accomplished something this past month when it released a report done on surveys across the country, and they came up with a remarkable finding. It concluded that noise annoys people. Now, I'll go back to my 8-year-old daughter who said, "Mommy, how could children learn in a noisy classroom? And how could they use the word annoyance without understanding that when people are intruded upon by noise, it's not simply annoying. It prevents them from sleeping. It prevents them from enjoying their backyards. It prevents them from interacting, talking to people. In other words, it diminishes the quality of life. Health is not just being alive. Good health is leading a decent quality of life." So I have to say, the FAA did a widespread study. It took them 5 years to come out with a report that says we are annoyed by aircraft noise. I think I've made myself very clear about how I feel about that. But let me give you a plus for the FAA. When I did that study on children being affected by train noise, a mother who lived near an airport told me her child was being intruded upon by aircraft noise. She said, "May I use your studies to advocate for quieter schools near airports?" I said, "Noise is noise." And after my study was done, other studies corroborated the findings of those 2 studies I conducted. And eventually the FAA was impacted by those studies because it spent several $100 million to quiet schools near airports. So that was an admission on the part of the FAA that aircraft noise impacted on learning. And I'm going to add, they set up a study. They wanted a study to see if that benefited the children. And I was asked to serve on the committee at the National Academy of Sciences to oversee that study. So there, the FAA gets a plus. It's an admission. Number 2, they also have a program of quieting homes within the paths of the airport. Now, here's the thing. The levels of sound that qualify you for abatement may be higher than they should be. And I think most people will say that today. But at least it was an admission on the part of the FAA that noise intrudes on the well-being of people. So if you have 2 programs where you are spending money to abate the homes, and now I also know that, and so those 2 programs is an acknowledgement. We also now know that we can have quieter engines. We are now working on quieter wings. So I think there's a greater awareness on the part of the industry, the aviation industry, that they can make their planes quieter. We know routes could be changed. The point is, if you acknowledge that this is a hazard to people's health, then you'll take action. But let me add one other thing. The country cares about money, spending money. Well, let me add this. The money spent on people who go into hospitals because of increased cardiovascular disorders due to aircraft noise, those dollars are costly. Who's paying for that? Every citizen in the United States. And if the children in my study were not helped with respect to learning, and children were consistently falling behind, how much money would it have taken to remediate learning? So you want to talk dollars? The FAA says this will be costly to the aviation industry to improve things so people are not exposed to the noise. Well, let me tell you, if you don't improve it, we're going to have higher medical costs And if children are still exposed to the noise at home, it's going to impede their learning as well. And that's called dollars that all of us are spending.
Thank you. That's a really important piece about looking at the healthcare costs that are just absolutely a given when you're talking about this kind of noise. So as you know, our focus is to address the noise of the F18 Growler jets, which can exceed 110 decibels. And it is, and we are in it in terms of our work with the Navy and with our elected officials. We are currently trying to hold the Navy accountable for real-time noise monitoring, which was required by the National Defense Authorization Act. And we want to ensure that, to the best of our ability, what comes out of that citizen-funded research is actually useful research and is actually going to prove that the Navy is that the decibels of their noise is not what has been reported in their environmental impact statement, which was which was a result of noise averaging. So we are in it in terms of holding the Navy accountable for that, and we are working hard in terms of our own strategy around working with our new administration in the White House and new elected officials, as well as soon a new Secretary of the Navy and other officials in the Navy. So we're really interested in your ideas as such a successful advocate around strategy suggestions and what you would recommend that we make sure we do to advance our concerns and our bottom line goal to relocate these jets to a place where they are not impacting human beings, they're not impacting creatures.
All right, let me add one thing. After I did the study on the effect of elevated train noise, the interesting thing is the Transit Authority asked me to be an advisor. And I've served as an advisor on noise to the very agency whom I criticized with my research. And the person there said, I'd rather have you sitting next to me, telling me what you think is wrong, and we could discuss it rather than having you go out and debate me in front of the citizen groups. And so I began to work with the Transit Authority. I never said stop running the trains. I do not own a car, never did own a car, and I'm totally dependent on New York City public transit. I didn't say stop running the trains. I said make them quieter. And I worked with the Transit Authority, and here I am knowing nothing about engineering. And I actually helped them design a quieter traction motor. They trusted me and they listened to my input, the psychologist, never having taken an engineering course. And so here's what I would say to the military. We're not saying that you should stop the training of our military. We need them. But can you work with the community in a way that you can lessen the impact of the noise on these people? Just as I said to the Transit Authority, I'm not telling you to stop running the trains. Let's work to make them quieter. We do not say to the FAA, stop your planes. I do fly, haven't flown in a little over a year, but I do fly. I didn't say we should stop flying. We should work together. And I felt very good when the FAA approved my appearing on a committee to evaluate the impact of their quieting the planes at schools near airports. I couldn't be the popular person with the FAA, but I'm a reasonable person, and I think you are too. And what you're really saying is, may we work together so that we can come up with a program that protects our military, because we still need the military, but also protects residents on the ground, as well as the mammals in the sea. We share this earth with other species. And what the pandemic has done is it's even informed us more so how damaging our noise is to the other species that share this earth. I have to add something. I was a zoology major in college, so I was very interested in other species before the humans. And what I'm trying to say is you work cooperatively. We have the knowledge. I don't think you have to prove that noise is detrimental to health and well-being. There's enough evidence. But if you wish to conduct a survey so that people can read how individuals exposed to that noise feel. When I interview people about noise, I wish the individuals who are making the noise could hear what I am listening to. So I think you can do it. We are in the 21st century. We know what to do. Remember I said what Russell Train said to the people he was addressing with respect to airport noise? We know what to do. Let's get on with the job. Thank you, Mr. Train.
That's great. Well, that's a perfect moment to pause and take some time, Dr. Bronzaft, to hear from other folks and allow some questions to come our way. So I'm going to check our chat function right now and just see what's out there. So the first question that came through is related to the work of the Sound Defense Alliance. Has Attorney General Bob Ferguson's lawsuit against the Navy been resolved, or is it ongoing? And the bottom line response to that is it is ongoing. I understand that it may get a hearing in the next month. We'll know more, but that suit in conjunction with Citizens of EB's Reserve, those two suits were combined into one. And that was a suit on the basis of, it was a NEPA-based suit. So basically saying that the environmental impact study that was done by the Navy was not complete or effective, and it needs to be redone. So that's the status on the lawsuit. And Tara has put the website address into the chat function for anyone who may not have that. There's a message from Janet Alderton saying, wonderful narrative, Arline Bronzaft. And let's see what else. Janet Alderton writes that Senator Cantwell has recently cited underwater noise as one of her top concerns in the context of impacts to marine organisms, especially orca whales. Yes to engineering noise abatement at the sources. So just a moment to stop and applaud the work of Lauren Keeney and her colleagues who have conducted 2 studies in the Northwest that have been published in the last months. Just a thanks to Lauren for all of her extraordinary work, including the hydrophone study that has led our region to understand that there may indeed be impacts down as low as 100 feet, impacting both the salmon and the orca, since the salmon are the primary food source of the orca whales. And also just to applaud her and acknowledge her work in the Olympic Peninsula as well, looking at the impact of the overflights of the growlers in that region. Janet Alderton, less noisy aircraft is more energy efficiency. And Lauren Keeney, you're here, hooray. My understanding, one important implication of the FAA's recent report on their neighborhood environmental survey. I'm gonna let you say that, Lauren, since you're here, go for it.
Hi, Arlene,
Hi, Lauren.
I'm just over here, like almost tearing up. This is so inspiring for me. It's like a highlight of my life. Okay, yes, I did ask a rather complicated question, so maybe it'll be easier. So I went to the FAA's webinar, and I haven't read their report, but I have sort of read about it. And I was wondering so my understanding is that what was important about that is that it's using FAA's own data, and they basically show that their Schultz curve that, everything is based on is just underestimating the annoyance that people experience.
Yes.
So that seems like and So my question for you is, that's a big deal, at least seems like a big deal, but do you think, how big of a deal policy-wise? Like, is this, I've heard it called game-changing by other people. I've heard other people say, oh, it's, nothing. I was just curious about what you thought about it. Yeah, I thought about what you thought about that report and if you think about the implications of it, or.
All right, in terms of the Schultz curve, and in terms of using average dBA, for example, if you live within the 65 decibel level, the mean dBA, and you're awakened, as my grandson is, at 5:40 in the morning by a plane overhead, that gets lost in the dBA because you're looking at the average. People want to know, what about the planes that awaken us early in the morning? What they're saying in that report essentially is they have underestimated the impact in terms of the decibel levels they've used. Do you know how many years people have said that to them? All right, so sometimes better late than never. It took, I think, 5 years, Lauren, for that report to come out in terms of how, from the time they started the study. What I would like to know now is, yes, you've acknowledged that your decibel levels have been set so high. I'm going to say what Russell Train has said. So what are you going to do about it? Are we going to have to wait 5 more years? So to me, when you find something out, look, I did a study that showed that noise impacted on children's learning and got action on it. I will say to the FAA, thank you for acknowledging that you may have been limited in estimating how annoying the planes are. I wouldn't have used the word annoying. That offends me personally. Tell me now, what plans do you have to remediate the situation so that there'll be less of an impact on people's health? Simple. Is that easy?
Thank you, Lauren, and thanks for being here and for all your extraordinary work. So Tony Blackner asks Dr. Bronzaft if you have noise contour level or levels, I guess, correlated with health effects that helped you.
No, I haven't done that. As a psychologist, by the way, when I did the study at the school, remember, I'm a psychologist. I don't measure sound levels. I have to say the City of New York's Department of Environmental Protection did all the measurements for me. So nobody can say, Dr. Bronzaft, you are not equipped to really accurately measure sound levels, thanks to New York City. So what I have not correlated the 65 DNL or the 60 in terms of responses physiologically. The answer is no. What I spend more time looking at is the impact on people. So any of my studies are available, and you'll see it really, what I'll do is I'll go into an area and it's within the 65 DNL. So I know the level at which we're looking at, and then inquire about their responses. And I have done 2 studies on that, and they're available online.
He says, great answer. I will look at those.
Okay, if he has any problem, I will forward the information to him.
That's great. And just to acknowledge that I found that Grow New York site to be particularly helpful on resources that related to your work. And so I just wanted to see if you think that's the best site to go on to Grow NYC and then find the education tab and go down to noise. If that's the best resource in terms of all of your research, or is there somewhere else we should?
Well, I want you to know one other thing, what New York City's Department of Environmental Protection did. It developed the sound and noise module. I worked with them. New York City, on its Department of Environmental Protection website, type in sound and noise, and you will have curricula to teach children from the lower grades through high school about the beauty of the good sounds in our world. Yes, the birds, the waves on the shore, and the dangers of noise. And this is accessible to any school district worldwide, that New York City took upon itself to develop curricula for children. And my children's book, Listen to the Raindrops, which is for first, second graders, teaches children from the perspective of a mouse about the beauty of sound and the dangers of noise. We should start with the children. And by the way, when I go into lecture to children about noise, I always thought that I'd walk in and in 10 minutes they say, we had enough. I get so many complaints from them. And my book is in verse. I want parents to know this. The book, it's when you read it, you'll see that it's written in verse. Yes, this academic did it. But then the children, after hearing me, a group of children wrote their own verses about sound and noise. And I think they did better than this academic.
Wow, that's really great. That's wonderful. Yeah, good to hear about children's involvement in this, because we need to hear their voices. And I think that's one of the concerns that you and I share, is that there isn't a place for their voice in terms of the impact of jet noise in our case.
Well, do look at the curricula.
Absolutely.
And do circulate that with teachers in your school district.
Great.
And by the way, when I did one of my podcasts on noise, my grandson was helping me set it up. He was about 14. He's now 15. He's far better versed in setting up podcast information than I. And he is intruded upon by noise. And so the interviewer said, let me speak to him. And I'm saying, wow, he actually could articulate how it feels, because he is exposed to it at home. And when he was in middle school, he was exposed to it. And I thought it was wonderful listening to the voice of this young child saying how noise intruded on his sleep, his well-being, and his learning.
Wow, good for him.
So next time, interview Maddie instead of his grandmother.
All right. What a duo. That's great. So we have a question from Ken Simpson. What does the Naval Air Station Whidbey Island do with phone calls to report jet noise, if anything? And Ken says, we are here at 120 decibels.
Wow.
Yeah. And what I can say is they recently changed their email address, which threw people for a loop at the end of last year. And I think it was a couple months it was down. They added they have a new email address. The phone number is still the same. And in my conversations with them, they essentially say that if the complaint is about something that's different, like a jet is off course, which they frequently are, and who even knows what the real course is these days, because there are more of them, and their routes have changed. They've expanded where they fly. So there are people in Green Bank saying, I never used to hear the jets, and they're over my head now. So at any rate, the Navy is required to pursue complaints that indicate that there's a change, in particular, either an extraordinarily loud noise, which it always is, or a change in terms of their route. So that's my understanding. I still need to find out. I don't think they're required to share this information with elected officials. However, my understanding is that elected officials can request the complaint information. And I do want to just call attention to the San Juan County jet noise site, where people can actually plant a pin where you are and write a comment about, again, it's 1 in the morning. Why are they still flying? Or they are so low, I just about can see the pilot's eyes. And those comments and the data is analyzed every 2 to 3 months. And all of that data is sent to our elected officials with the comments. And those comments, I read them every time that report comes out. And it's just stunning. And it's what you described too about Dr. Bronzaft about just people need to be heard, and it is such a powerless sense of these jets that are flying intermittently at extremely loud volumes and really disrupting people's homes and health. So there is another source. Be sure you go to the to either the Quiet Skies. This is Quiet Skies of San Juan County, or the Sound Defense Alliance website, and look up that site and make sure you put your own complaints in there as well, because we're expanding it beyond San Juan County. We need to hear from folks all across the region on that site. That data is going to elected officials. Yeah, go ahead.
May I ask you a question?
Yes.
Are your public officials working with you on this issue?
Yes.
And are they supporting you in looking at the data that will give them specific information as to how that noise is working in your community? I heard Lauren talk about that yesterday, so I have some idea that there are data out there with levels, frequency, so you have all of that.
Yeah.
So have your public officials use that data to work with the Navy and trying to come up with solutions.
Right.
Data are fine. You need it.
Yeah.
I keep hearing, show me the data. But then I will say, show me the money that will use this data to remedy the situation. Going to a doctor who diagnoses you is one thing. You now have the diagnosis, but you now want that doctor to treat you. The same analogy. You've got the data, you know what people are exposed to, then how are you using that data to remedy the situation? A doctor that just diagnoses without treating does not have a patient who feels better after that visit.
Yes, well said, absolutely. And I must say that I am encouraged by our most recent meetings with our elected officials. In response to your question, are they working with us? I think this is a window of opportunity right now that is a really significant one, with not just our local elected officials who we need to now really get on board, our local commissioners and mayors across the region, but our federal elected officials are listening. We are at the table with them. And I would certainly say that there are several of them who truly are on our side and are working with us very closely. So I'm really encouraged and look forward to really moving this forward and seeing what we can do with a new Secretary of Navy and all of the other Navy officials who will be screened by our Senate. And that includes some of our Washington State delegation who will be asking very focused questions about this issue. So that's encouraging, and we will continue to fight and move forward.
Count me in. I will assist you in any way I can.
We are so
Thank
grateful.
you.
Well, on that note, I should just check and see if there was any final question. I don't think there was. We're good. I want to thank you, Dr. Bronzaft, for your time and your attention and your care to this issue. You clearly have, without you, who knows where the field of noise research would be. And you both make it very personal and accessible to people who are listening, to people who have worked with you, and you get things done. I mean, you are amazing.
Thank you for the opportunity. Thank you.
Truly, in honor of Women's History Month, we acknowledge your contributions to inspiring girls and young women around the world. So thank you.
Thank you so much. Oh, my pleasure.
Look forward to working with you in the future.
We will be partners. Good luck.
All right. And thanks to everyone who joined us. Be sure to join the Sound Defense Alliance if you have not yet had the opportunity. And we encourage you to get involved. It's a really exciting point in time right now. And we are going to move forward and get things done, just like Dr. Bronzaft. So thanks to everyone for joining us. Thank you, Dr. Bronzaft.
Thank you.